Thank you, Mr. Speaker. BC's reputation as being an equal partner in cooperative federalism is being further discredited by the day. Instead of working collaboratively with our provincial and federal partners, this government instead chooses to appease its three most important constituents, its coalition partners in the Green Party. Today, however, we are witness to a government willing to put its own political future above that of its relationship with the rest of Canada. Will the Minister of Environment come clean to British Columbians and state the actual motivations behind the government's reckless actions?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. It should come as no surprise to the member opposite, any member in this House, or any British Columbians that our government campaigned on a promise to protect our environment, to protect our waters, our coastline, to protect our inland streams and rivers. We have looked at this issue very carefully. It's no surprise that we have been in opposition to the pipeline, but we understand the federal government has jurisdiction to approve it, despite the fact that we are challenging that in court. But what we have determined, and what we are standing up for on behalf of British Columbians, is a right that has been stated by the courts that provinces have a role, a responsibility, and a right to regulate, to protect against environmental impacts in our jurisdiction, and that is exactly what we're consulting with British Columbians about.
Richmond Queensborough on a supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad the member stated that the federal government does have jurisdiction. Perhaps he should explain that to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also sees things differently. Just yesterday, he called out this government, stating the NDP's action against Kinder Morgan are putting the entire national climate change plan at risk. In fact, the Prime Minister believes the Premier is actually, quote, trying to scuttle our national plan on fighting climate change, end quote. This does not sound like a government interested in working together. This sounds like a self-serving government acting blindly and recklessly. Will this government stop this reckless behaviour, walk back its ill-conceived policy, and admit to the Prime Minister of Canada that it's made a mistake?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I hope the member opposite heard me very clearly. We're clear about where the federal government has jurisdiction. We're also clear about where the province of BC has jurisdiction. The previous government was willing to give that up until the courts told them that it was our jurisdiction, and we are standing up for British Columbians within our jurisdiction. Honourable Speaker, British Columbians want to know why the members of the opposition won't stand up for BC's jurisdiction, won't stand up for environment, won't stand up for our rivers, lakes and streams, won't stand up for our coastline, and won't stand up for our wine industry. Honourable Speaker, I'd like to know the answer to that as well.
Member Prince George Vilmont.
Yesterday, we raised concerns about taxpayer-funded government ads directly mirroring the anti-development slogans of groups opposed to the Trans Mountain project. And it's obviously clear that the government actions on this file have had very little to do with good public policy. It's all about keeping activists and agitators who oppose the Trans Mountain project on side. My question is to the Minister of the Environment. Following his announcement on January 30th, did he attend a dinner on Bowen Island with activist groups opposed to the Trans Mountain project?
Members, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Honourable Speaker, I have attended luncheons with the Business Council of British Columbia where I've answered their questions about our environmental assessment review. I've attended the Resource Forum in British Columbia to talk with resource developers in all industries about what we need to do to move ahead together to build a sustainable economy. And yes, I met with environmental activists on Bowen Island to talk about our role in protecting BC's environment.
Prince George Vailmont on a supplemental.
January 30th was the date that the minister announced the measures that sparked the conflict with Alberta and the federal government. In fact, that started a trade war. Following his announcement, I understand the minister attended dinner with a group that calls itself the Kinder Morgan Strategy Group. This includes Greenpeace, Stand.Earth, and 23 other activist groups that aim, in their own words, to fight the Trans Mountain Project. Will the minister please tell us exactly who attended his victory dinner and how he can continue to claim that he is an unbiased regulator?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Honourable Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to answer this question. Yesterday, I had a meeting with representatives of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Last week, I had a meeting with the head of the Mining Association of BC. In previous weeks, I've met with representatives of Teck Resources as well as the Association of Mineral Explorers in BC. On the evening of January 30th, I attended a dinner with the express purpose of answering questions of representatives of the environmental movement to explain the actions of my government. At all times, Honourable Speaker, I made it clear that I am the Minister of the Environment. That is my role. I am explaining government policy in my role as Minister.
Member Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let's just see if I got this right. The minister announces provocative measures that everyone sees as an illegal attempt to halt the Trans Mountain Project. The very same day, he reports back to his activists and agitators. This so-called Kinder Morgan Strategy Group was holding a 48-hour retreat on how to halt the project. Hopefully, you at least had BC wine at that retreat. To the minister, was there discussion at this meeting of civil disobedience tactics these groups may deploy should your government's illegal attempt to block the project fail?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Honourable Speaker, what I've been trying to make clear in my answers to other questions is that I am prepared as Minister of the Environment to consult with people across all sectors of BC society, across all industrial sectors, across all environmental sectors, and other British Columbians who wish to tell me what they think or ask me what they think. Perhaps the member opposite would care to reflect on the actions of the past government that didn't believe it was important to consult with all British Columbians, that believed instead, Honourable Speaker, that it was important to meet quietly in Calgary with proponents of projects just before they received several $100,000 in contributions from Kinder Morgan and their friends.
Kamloops North Thompson on a supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if memory serves, it was this previous government that negotiated the $1.5 billion spill response that your actions have now put in jeopardy. But however, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue, and the minister needs to start being transparent about his conversations with the activists. One of the minister's dinner companions was Sephora Berman. Now, this is Berman's view on Trans Mountain, and I quote, "Conflict is messy and unpleasant, but looking necessary. Nobody likes conflict. I've been to jail, and it's not a pleasant place, and I'm not looking forward to go back there. But we'll do what it takes." Her direct quote. Will a minister disavow statements that support conflict and illegal activity?
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Honourable Speaker, I'm quite prepared to stand in this House and answer for my opinions, for my actions, but it's not my job, nor would I think the public of BC would expect me to answer for the opinions or the statements of other people. But I will point out, however, that Ms. Berman was retained by the province of Alberta to advise on climate change strategy. She was retained by the previous government to advise on climate change strategy. She is well respected and is an adjunct professor. Honourable Speaker, the real question here is, what do British Columbians expect of a government? They expect a government that will stand up for our environment, stand up for our interests, and unlike the previous government, not back away from the possibility of exerting our jurisdiction over environmental protection and regulation, but stand up for it. The previous government gave it up. The courts told them they were wrong. We are reclaiming it and exercising our jurisdiction to protect our environment and our economy, and we'll continue to do that.
House Leader for the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, just last month, the Premier said, and I'll quote, "If we're going to be a government that governs for all BCers, we have to set aside our activism and start being better administrators."
Yeah, that's a good idea.
He probably should have added that to the mandate letter for the Minister of Environment, somewhere around the bullet where he says, "Employ every tool available to block the Kinder Morgan pipeline." I think at this point, and with the questions that are being raised about the dinners and the retreats for strategy on activism, it's time that the Minister of Environment tell us why it is he won't take the advice of his Premier and set aside his activism for a change.
Minister of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, I am doing my job and fulfilling my function as Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategy to exercise BC's right and responsibility under the Environmental Management Act to protect our economy and protect our coast. Honourable Speaker, there's a court decision which the previous government chose not to appeal, and it states in part this. The case is known as Coastal First Nations, and it states to disallow any provincial regulation over the project because it engages a federal undertaking would significantly limit the province's ability to protect social, cultural, and economic interests in its lands and waters. It would go against the current trend in the jurisprudence.